So what's working and what isn't? So when we look at e-learning today, there are a lot of spaces in this market. I myself have had the honor of helping to stand up corporate universities for government organizations and franchises. And it's really interesting when you think about it. But I would say what is working is, and this is not a shout out or a plug, but if anyone is interested in looking at a really successful e-learning corporate university, I would check out Salesforce. They have a lot of interesting elements. Miko, you'd be interested in this. They do gamification in a lot of their profiles and how they scaffold their curriculum. And they have incentivized it, and they have various point structures that are so well thought out that it was, as an instructional designer, I was obsessed. And the great thing about Salesforce is you can sign up for free. So if you wanted to take a look at the LMS that they've provided for their customers, you can get a sense of what they're doing, how they're organizing their learning profiles and the curriculum and the different resources that they provide. Personally, I would say what isn't working is Cornerstone. So this gets kind of meta, but basically the LMS for the LMS provider Cornerstone is very, very complex. And when you go to it, there are just so many places that you can look that it really becomes overwhelming. The content is decent, but in terms of how it's structured and organized, you have to know and be an expert in the type of Cornerstone program that you have agreed to in order to actually know what you want to look for on their site. So that's something in terms of the corporate university space that I thought was really interesting. And the other thing that I think is really cool now is adult education for-profit e-learning is blowing up. And I come from a very traditional instructional design background. I'm a bit of a purist in that standpoint, that like I want my designers to have adult education experience. But now anyone who has Premiere Pro or Camtasia has the ability to create a course. I don't know if anyone has heard of Masterclass, but literally it's just celebrities and people who are at the top of their industry sitting in front of a camera talking about themselves. And it's making so much money. And I heard that it's really, really successful. So I'm curious to see, and I would love to do more research on if there's an instructional designer mastermind that's like organizing all of these things, because that's something that I'm really, really interested in. Now, Udemy, if you haven't heard of it, please check it out. It's a really interesting website that basically allows anyone to be an instructional designer and a subject matter expert. I had a friend who wanted to create a course for understanding various legal policies and procedures for the everyday man or woman. And he came to me, and I was, coming at it from a very prescript instructional design process. And he was like, well, I can just go to this website and put a video of me here and questions here and have a chunk here for people to put in their answers. And that should be fine, right? I almost cringed. I allowed him the space to say that. But ultimately, what's really fascinating about Udemy is that you, as a subject matter expert, have the ability to build your own courses. And you also have your own LMS in your account. So it's really, really fascinating when you think about it. I personally am still of the mind that, like, if you want to go the Udemy route because it is technically more cost effective, I still recommend following up with an instructional designer just to make sure that your curriculum is sound. And then finally, everybody knows about YouTube University, right? It is the gold standard of putting stuff on the internet and letting people learn unregulated. So my pros and cons with it are that, it's great because I've heard stories of people who've actually started second careers just by watching YouTube videos of learning how to fix things. And now they do that full time. However, I think, like I said, because it's unregulated in certain standards, you might be getting inaccurate information or you're not learning how to effectively do something based on best practices. So, taking your YouTube University courses with a grain of salt is always my recommendation. But I really do appreciate how much there is out there. And we're on YouTube. So there's that. So, thinking through those kinds of things really have helped me to understand like what is and what isn't working within the for-profit space for adult education. And then finally, there is the government, which in some ways it's not standard. Well, I'll just say this, it's not standardized. So you'll have some government agencies who are literally working off of, the old black and green screens from the Jurassic Park. Everybody remembers that scene in Jurassic Park where she's like clicking through and you can see how old everything looks on the computers. Oh my God. There are some government agencies that are still working off of that stuff. I kid you not, and presenting curriculum in that way. But then there are other government platforms and learning management systems that are truly cutting edge, state of the art. I had the honor of managing a contract where we were actually executing cyber warfare games for government agencies of all levels. And it was cutting edge experiential learning. And I know that if you have the opportunity to work for the Department of Defense or specifically the armed forces, that is where you'll go to get some truly top notch, cutting edge adult learning technology experience. And I'm going to say it again, it's not all standardized. However, I do know that the Army was one of the first organizations to execute with virtual reality training. Whenever they were recruiting new people into the service, that was one thing that they used. So thinking through those kinds of things, it's really fascinating to see what is and isn't working within online learning, specifically with the government space. Finally, what's next in online learning? I've done some really interesting research, and what I thought was fascinating is that now the big thing that people in this space are looking to address is Zoom fatigue. So when you think about asynchronous learning experiences, you want to be considering how can you make this space less of a hassle or less of something that like people want to just not put their cameras on for. And so I've seen some really interesting opportunities for this. Specifically, Facebook is coming up with an application that allows people to enter into a space. And then there are things like virtual chat rooms where you can actually wander around a space and hear people talking as you get closer. And when you walk away, it gets fainter. So those are things that people now, e-learning developers, are trying to think through to battle asynchronous Zoom fatigue. Another popular thing that is starting to come up is online avatars. So if you're in an asynchronous space, I think we all remember the viral video of the lawyer in court who accidentally turned himself into a cat. So now some professors or online presenters are creating engaging avatars. I saw one that was a raccoon. And so, you have these things that will allow people to catch their attention. But I think, and I want to make this connection. I wouldn't be surprised if people are focusing on those things because they're not effectively applying Gagne's 9 principles of learning. So, in my opinion, if you're applying those traditional principles actively and successfully, you might not be as concerned about Zoom fatigue or having to turn yourself into a cat for your students to pay attention to you. We mentioned virtual reality, which I know for myself, I get dizzy very quickly, so I might not be good for it, but that's something that people are doing. And then incentivizing learning and engagement, which is something that Miko has talked about in previous videos that we've shown. That's something that I think is valuable, but I'm curious to see what happens next with that.